I do apologize if you hear any white noise in the background. I can't really turn it off right now. I want to discuss a very nuanced topic in the therian community. Clinical lycanthropy, or people with clinical lycanthropy, are valid as therians. I think it's a little more to that than just a black and white answer, so I want to go over it, and if you have an answer about it, I'd like to hear in the comments. But anyway, let's get started. Lycanthropy, or clinical lycanthropy, is the delusion where a person thinks they are an animal. A lot of people think that these people should be separated from therianthropy because this inclusion causes people to lump the labels together, even though everybody familiar or most familiar with the therian community can easily understand the difference between these two labels, and it's not our obligation to educate and inform every person who thinks they're the same thing. Lycanthropy already separates itself from therianthropy by definition, but it doesn't inherently exclude everyone from one another label. In my opinion, just because their experience came from delusion, it doesn't make them any less valid as they feel or how they feel as a non-human. Seeing people scared of these labels being lumped together and starting to outcast them is pretty weird when anti-kin do that anyway. They all think we're mentally ill, so if you just exclude other people because you think they're too mentally ill for the community, then you're the problem. Zoanthropes or lycanthropes because they can identify as an animal from delusion or so happen to have the clinical illness as well. Excluding them to make us seem normal won't help and hurts everyone. We don't want the nice therians, the pretty therians, to be mixed up with those mentally ill people, is all I'm hearing. If you're afraid to be mistaken as somebody mentally ill, stand for the mentally ill person and fight for their rights. Therianthropy is already a complicated label to begin with. If a lycanthrope wants to identify as a therian because they are fundamentally non-human or find comfort in the identity or label, they should be allowed to do so. And also, zoanthropy or lycanthropy that's clinical doesn't always mean that the person's therian identity comes from it. They can more so happen to have both of them at the same time. Their mental disorders shouldn't disallow them from exploring their identity. Anyone should be allowed to, mentally ill or not. Delusions are still beliefs or deep beliefs that are personal and often experiences that the person's having. Therefore, it can still qualify as alterhuman, even if it doesn't look like that they're living it or experiencing it on the outside. Everyone's saying that this stuff is because they're scared of these people being violent, because they're mentally ill, or outright blaming them or babying them, has never dealt with an actual mental ill person. I do think that the part of the community that wants to exclude the mentally ill people from therians that don't have a mental illness like that, even though their experience still qualifies as non-human, it's still really weird to be excluding them for that reason. All in all, in my personal opinion, it does seem a little ableist. Their mental illness shouldn't disregard their identity. Everyone saying that they should be separated is, I don't know, it's a little mixed. Because there are already two different labels on its own, and it can just be so happen to have a therian who has this mental illness or the other way around. Two can overlap because it's a complicated identity. If you believe that you're non-human, you are non-human, or alterhuman to say the least. Just because you view yourself as non-human because of a mental illness doesn't change that. Yes, mentally ill people should still get the help they need, but all in all, it shouldn't stop them from exploring their identity and finding comfort in the label due to their mental illness. Some lycanthropes don't identify as therians, and some therians just don't identify as lycanthropes because they're not the same thing, but they can overlap. As said, it's a complicated, personal, deep identity, and you don't have the right to demand an explanation from people who have these overlapping conditions with their identity. Shunning away mentally ill people from the community doesn't help. It just makes us more excluding. I've mentioned this before, but a community that claims to be oh so welcoming, yet turns around and be ableist because they don't want mentally ill people to give them a bad representation is already weird enough to say or think. You don't realize how you sound until you really look into it. Then again, it's right in your face. Wanting to exclude mentally ill people from your community because you think they'll give them a bad representation, or you don't want to be quote-unquote mixed with them, sounds weird because it is weird. It's ableist. Though it's not like a disability, but I do think that like you can still be ableist to people with disorders. I don't know if that's like the definition, but you get my point. Also, I want to talk about people who have psychosis and then their psychosis forms clinical zoanthropy, but they already existed as an alterhuman, or the other way around, where they had clinical zoanthropy and they identified as a alterhuman because of that, and then their zoanthropy drifted away or faded away, or they got help for it, but they still identify as a physical therian or a therian of some sorts. Stuff like that does happen. So I think it kind of proves my point on like them still being non-human or alterhumans. Also, before I'd like to note that like holotherians and lycanthropes or zoanthropes are not the same thing. One is a mental illness where you believe you're an animal, and the other is someone who identifies as a therian. I mean, as an animal physically. But this does not mean they are exclusive to one another. They can be separate from each other, or they can be the reason you are one another. Clinical zoanthropy can be one of the reasons somebody is a physical therian, though not all clinical lycanthropes are or identify as therians. Hot take, but the only reason why people exclude zoanthropy from therianthropy is because the words mental illness have a negative connotation to them. People use mentally ill as an insult. It sounds degrading. And personally, I don't think people use the term mentally ill on them because of these connotations, but some people do because they've unlearned that. Anyways, this is really all I have to say for today's video. Thank you and goodbye. Comment down your thoughts on it. I would really love to know.